From the heart of our nation's capital, here's Family Research Council President Tony Perkins.
Welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks for tuning in. Well, coming up on this Thursday edition, President Joe Biden is meeting with his Chinese counterpart, Communist dictator Xi Jinping.
I value our conversation because I think it's paramount that you and I understand each other clearly, leader to leader, with no misconceptions or miscommunication. We have to ensure that competition does not veer into conflict. And we also have to manage it responsibly, that competition. That's what the United States wants and what we intend to do.
Well, the question is, could the U.S. be looking for competition while China is looking for conflict? We're going to talk with New Jersey Congressman Chris Smith, chairman of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. And while some want the Republican Party to walk away from protecting the unborn, RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel says this.
We can win on this message. The American people are where we are, and they want common sense limitations. They want more access to adoption. We want to make sure that there's pregnancy crisis centers. These are things we can win on, but we have to talk about it, and you can't hide in a corner and think abortion's not going to be an issue.
That was RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. This past weekend on NBC Meet the Press. She joins us here on Washington Watch just a bit later. And a raucous week of alleged kidney punches and unusual verbal sparring in the House of Representatives. Well, they adjourned today and will go home for a cooling off period and return after Thanksgiving. Speaker Mike Johnson acknowledged the House was at its limit.
Members have been here for, as Leader Scalise said, for 10 weeks. This place is a pressure cooker. And so I think everybody can go home. We can come back, reset. We're going to get our group together. We're going to map out that plan to fight for those principles. And we have some great plans in the playbook already.
We'll get an overview of what was and wasn't accomplished this week a little later with FRC's Director of Government Affairs, Kana Gonzalez. And in a hearing on Capitol Hill this afternoon, Jonathan Greenblatt, director of the Anti-Defamation League, said this.
In the wake of this massacre, the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust, the ADL has tracked a surge of anti-Semitism around the world, and right here in America, in public spaces, in workplaces, and indeed on our college campuses, even in K-12 schools. And it's getting worse.
Texas Senator Ted Cruz joins us to talk about the wokeness that has overtaken America's education system and what you can do about it. Our word for today comes from Hebrews chapter 10. Therefore, brethren, having boldness to enter the holiest by the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, which he consecrated for us through the veil, that is his flesh, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. So how do we hold fast to our confession and not waver in these times? He goes on in verse 24, and let us consider one another in order to stir up love and good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as is the manner of some, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. Well, here's the answer. We need to be in the Word, in prayer, and in community with other believers. To find out more about our journey through the Bible, go to frc.org/Bible. And also, let me encourage you to join us in the effort to pray for the House Speaker and the House of Representatives as they move forward. To join us in this effort, simply text the word Speaker to 67742. That's the word Speaker to 67742, and you can join in the effort to pray for House Speaker Mike Johnson and the House of Representatives. It's important that they succeed. President Biden met with Chinese President Xi Jinping earlier today in California. In fact, the meeting's still going on, hoping to stabilize U.S.-China relations in a year that brought us spy balloons overhead and secret Chinese police stations in American cities. The world leaders are expected to announce a fentanyl regulation agreement, as well as plans for keeping AI programs away from nuclear launch command centers. But given the strained relations between the countries, as well as ongoing geopolitical issues, including two hot wars in Israel and Ukraine, what outcome can we expect? What is the best way forward? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Congressman Chris Smith. He is the chairman of the Congressional Executive Commission on China. He is also the senior member on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. He represents the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey, and he joins us by phone. Congressman Smith, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you very much, Tony. Appreciate being on, and thank you for your great work.
Well, let's appreciate that. Let's start with this. What do you expect from today's meeting between President Biden and the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping?
Very little. You know, the Biden administration has been weak and vacillating, and don't think that that's not taken all into consideration by Xi Jinping. I mean, our exodus out of Afghanistan was egregiously flawed, and they always write about it in their propaganda organs. And I read their op-eds. They tell the people of Taiwan, don't think America has your back. Look what they did to their own Americans and to their allies in Afghanistan with that horrific, exodus that left people behind. So he goes in, I think, very much debilitated by his own miscues and mistakes and flaws when it comes to foreign policy, and that has a profound impact on any possible outcomes. You know, I saw one estimate was, or one a person within the administration, saying that the fact that the two are talking is a good thing. Please, give me a break. I mean, they're committing genocide right now against the Uyghurs. They're upping their religious persecution, including, there's a new report just came out by Hong Kong Watch about how Hong Kong is getting worse when it comes to religious freedom, and they're doing it all throughout the country, just crushing Christianity, or trying to. And it's just awful. And then, of course, forced abortion, particularly as a genocide tool. And they're killing tens of thousands, and I have a bill that passed to try to stop it. It's pending in the Senate. Tens of thousands of average-age 28-year-olds to get their organs. That's right out of Nazi Germany. Is Biden going to raise that? Is he going to raise the genocide that's being perpetrated upon the Uyghurs? And you know it. You ran the Religious Freedom Commission, just how horrible and egregious that really is. And, they'll make nice and talk about friendship. And, well, he's talking to a dictator. You got to talk to him.
Right.
But it's got to be with a very serious human rights agenda.
I mean, when you go back and you came in with Ronald Reagan, he had conversations with Russian leaders, but it was very clear and direct what America was looking for. At the opening of their meeting today, President Biden said, look, we're not looking for conflict. We want competition, but we don't want that to veer into conflict. Do you think the Chinese are looking at this the same way? I don't think they're afraid of conflict.
No, I don't think they are either. And I think don't talk about it like it's competition between a football team. These are people who commit atrocities each and every day. It's like, Israel has a competition with Hamas. No, Hamas is committing crimes against humanity like China is each and every day. It's not a competition. It is an attempt that we should be making to stand with the oppressed people of China and all those they seek to hurt, which is particularly in the region, all the countries that are in proximity to them, including especially the Philippines lately. So it's a real problem, and Taiwan is in the crosshairs. It's not a competition. But again, we need to be so clear about, human rights, because they look at us and they say it's a talking point on page 15 of the president's agenda here. It's not there. And as a senator, he did the same thing, Tony. He was so weak on human rights in China when he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Senate. Why do we expect something different now?
I want to go to some of the issues that was raised in a letter that was sent by the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, chaired by Congressman Mike Gallagher. This was sent to President Biden in advance of this meeting. And one of the things that they were, well, actually, there's a whole laundry list of things that they were hoping the president would address, including the fentanyl crisis, this flow of deadly fentanyl across our borders, the fact that Americans are still being held in China. They're being held prisoner, haven't been released. They bring up the issues of the lack of access to Chinese markets from American producers, the tensions in Taiwan, the provocation, military provocation that we're seeing with the Chinese military toward ours, and the list goes on. Do you think the president is going to address any of these issues?
Maybe tangentially, but not in a substantive way. Again, the expectations have already been downplayed by his own staff, so I don't expect much to come out of it. But again, access to their markets, we've been talking about that forever, and we play not hardball, but weak ball. And they're an exporting economy. If we said you can't export the way you have been unless human rights are tied to MFN, we get changes.
Right.
Do
you think that Biden...
I had a hearing yesterday, Tony, on cobalt. All of it's coming out of the DR Congo. It's for EVs, and I have a bill that I'm introducing, a second one, that would really say anything they produce in China that comes from DR Congo with child and slave labor is inadmissible to the United States unless they can prove otherwise.
That's the approach the Trump administration was taking. They were playing hardball with China. That is the approach the Trump administration. They were tough, predictable, and they did not play games where statements are made by this chief executive, Joe Biden, that makes it sound like when he talked about competition. Please get rid of that word. It's not competition. These people are purveyors of gross human rights abuse. They have hegemony aspirations throughout the region, and I would say the entire world. That's like saying we had a competition with the Nazi Germany or Imperial Japan. Nothing could be further from the truth. Right, you have to have a common goal. You have to have a common goal if you're going to be in competition with someone else. Right. And you say they have a different goal. Their goal is to dominate the world, however it needs to be done. And I think.
And Tony, even on climate change. Now, the president,
that probably
if my
is going
bill were
to be
to get
talked
to
about.
him, he'll veto it. I have no doubt about that. In terms of stopping child labor that's making cobalt or mining cobalt, many of those kids are dying, 35 to 40,000 a year, 200,000 adults, and there's an MOU that isn't worth the paper it's printed on, really. They ought to do their own production in DR Congo. Instead, they're getting paid off by the Chinese Communist Party.
But part of this
and all
is
of
the
that
belt.
Comes here in Teslas and other cars.
A part of this is the Belt and Road Initiative, where China
right.
is expanding its reach and, in fact, many places taking over properties because these countries can't afford to pay the loans that they've gotten from China, and so they're doing this for their rare earth minerals, and so we're feeding that. We're feeding that with our electric cars. All this other stuff that we're pushing is actually fueling this overreach by China and building up their material wealth. Congressman Chris Smith, we're out of time, but always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for taking
Tony,
time to join us.
Tony, thank you so very much for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye now.
All right, folks. I say weekend because Congress is adjourned. We're going to talk about that later. Kana Gonzalez is going to be joining me to give us a wrap-up of what happened in Congress this week, blow by blow. But after the break, RNC Chair Ronna McDaniel joins me to discuss how Republican candidates should campaign on protecting the unborn. The RNC is not backing away from it, even though some Republicans are, and the pundits are saying that's a losing issue. Life is always a winning issue. We're going to talk about it next here on Washington Watch. Don't go away.
Everything we do begins as an idea. Before there can be acts of courage, there must be the belief that some things are worth sacrificing for. Before there can be marriage, there is the idea that man should not be alone. Before there was freedom, there was the idea that individuals are created equal. It's true that all ideas have consequences, but we're less aware that all consequences are the fruit of ideas. Before there was murder, there was hate. Before there was a Holocaust, there was the belief by some people that other people are undesirable. Our beliefs determine our behavior, and our beliefs about life's biggest questions determine our worldview. Where did I come from? Who decides what is right and wrong? What happens when I die? Our answers to these questions explain why people see the world so differently. Debates about abortion are really disagreements about where life gets its value. Debates over sexuality and gender and marriage are really disagreements about whether the rules are made by us or for us. What we think of as political debates are often much more than that. They're disagreements about the purpose of our lives and the source of truth. As Christians, our goal must be to think biblically about everything. Our goal is to help you see beyond red and blue, left and right, to see the battle of ideas at the root of it all. Our goal is to equip Christians with a biblical worldview and help them advance and defend the faith in their families, communities, and the public square. Cultural renewal doesn't begin with campaigns and elections. It begins with individuals turning from lies to truth. But that won't happen if people can't recognize a lie and don't believe truth exists. We want to help you see the spiritual war behind the political war, the truth claims behind the press release, and the forest from the trees.
Welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to have you with us. The website, TonyPerkins.com. Well, after voters in Ohio passed Issue 1 last week, allowing for abortion on demand through all 9 months of pregnancy, the legacy media and even some Republican campaign strategists began to grumble that candidates might need to consider a retreat from protecting human life. I continue to emphasize the need for pro-life candidates to go on the offense for protecting the unborn, especially when the Democrats have staked out the extreme position of abortion until birth with zero restrictions. Fortunately, that message for Republican candidates that they need to stand for life is coming from the Republican Party. It's in the party platform, and it's coming from the party leadership, who's not retreating from this issue. Here's a clip this past weekend. Ronna McDaniel was on NBC Meet the Press. Clip 2, please.
We also have to define ourselves before the Democrats define us. And this is my #1 message. If you're digging yourself out of a hole, you're going to lose. But if you go on TV and you say to the American people, listen, we all are passionate about this issue, and it's confusing right now. But in a time of consensus, can't we agree on reasonable limitations at 15 weeks when a baby feels pain?
In other words, this is not the time to go silent, to lose our voice on this issue. Joining me now to talk about this is Ronna McDaniel, chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. Ronna, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me, Tony, and thanks for talking about this issue so vocally. I think it's really important.
Well, I thank you, because you've never wavered on this message, even when the pundits and others have said we need to back away from this issue. I think you summed it up in that clip very well. What happened in the midterm elections in 2022 is that the Republican position was not articulated by Republicans. They were defined by Democrats who spent so much more money on this issue while Republicans were silent. If it's important, we're not going to be silent about it.
We shouldn't be silent. Listen, we're proud to be a party that stands for the unborn. And I think coming out of Roe, after 50 years of silence and people not having to navigate this issue, it's really important that we define ourselves before the Democrats do. Let's talk about pregnancy crisis centers. Let's talk about getting rid of cumbersome regulation to adoption. But let's also put the Democrats on the defense, because they stand for late-term abortion. They stand for gender selection abortion. Can't we even say to them, won't you agree that when a baby feels pain, when a baby can physically feel its life being taken away from them, that is a bridge too far? And they won't meet us even there. They are the extreme on this issue. And when you say that to the voters, we win.
Right. And it's about where we are in building consensus. And that's how we, I say we, pro-lifers, how we got to this point of seeing Roe overturned. It was step by step, inch by inch, as we built that consensus, educating people, winning hearts and minds. It's the same playbook. I mean, we've got to continue to do that.
We do, and I think we have a lot of candidates. You know, there's a miscommunication. The RNC doesn't do TV, right? We're ground game, but a lot of our candidates and consultants are afraid to tackle this issue, and they just can't be. In Virginia, our candidates were outspent by 9 times on abortion messaging. We've seen this across the country where our candidates are being told, don't talk about it. But if you get out and define yourself first, and you say to the public, this is where I stand, this is who I am, let me tell you about where I stand on this issue. And let me tell you where my Democrat opponent is. We will win, but you've got to put money behind it. You can't say it behind a paywall or on a phone call.
Right.
You've got to put money defining yourself first before the Democrats do, because they will define us and say we won't give life-saving care for miscarriages or ectopic pregnancies, things that are total lies, but they will fearmonger. And when a lie goes unanswered, it becomes the truth.
Yes, and we saw that they put millions of dollars into the messaging in Ohio, where they just won issue 1. But 2 points I want to make here. First is what you're saying on this program, you say everywhere, whether it's on CNN, whether it's MSNBC, CBS. I've heard you say it there. I've heard you say it at meetings of Republican donors. So this message is consistent. I want my viewers and listeners to hear that. But I want you to go back for just a moment and explain the role of the RNC, because I think a lot of people misunderstand what the RNC does.
Oh, I appreciate that. You know, we are the turnout machine. So we're in 70 lawsuits right now protecting election integrity. We're out there pushing bank your vote, but we don't do the messaging for the candidate. And that makes sense. The candidate uses their general consultant and their pollster to determine how they're going to identify and communicate to voters. I say this way. We build the road, all the cars drive on it. But the cars don't always take our directions. And so we're going to give them the best advice, but they need us to be doing things like voter registration and turn out the vote. And if you look at Virginia and even Kentucky this week, more Republicans turned out than Democrats. So I don't think it's a turnout issue. I think it's a messaging issue, and we've got to get this right before 2024. And it's really going to be up to candidates to be able to define themselves on this issue.
Yeah, I think I've seen that, and I think you're doing a good job in the turnout, although this is not directed at you. I'm directing this to churches and to our audience. When you've got turnout in some places like Kentucky, I think it was 40 in the 40s, we need to be turning out in every election and voting. And I want to challenge, Christians to turn out every time there's something on the ballot, because when you've got less than half of the population voting, your vote can actually have a greater impact if you show up to vote.
That's so true. It's so true. And Democrats have an unlimited pot of money, right? They have big tech. They've got Hollywood. They have all these outside groups. They have Planned Parenthood. They are absolutely mobilized and financed. And we need everybody coming together because our country's at stake. Our values are at stake. Our future's at stake. The American dream's at stake. The American family is at stake. How we identify as male and female is at stake. Our children are at stake. Our religious liberty is at stake. And Democrats, if they get their way, if they take the Senate, if they win the White House and they get the House, they will get rid of the filibuster. They will stack the Supreme Court, and they will fundamentally change the America we know and love. And that is what we are fighting for in 2024. I will work alongside every single candidate, but Democrats have nothing to run on except for abortion. And they spent $350 million on it in 2022. They're going to use the same playbook in 2024. And our candidates need to get up to speed and be able to go on TV and articulate where we stand, because when we do, we win.
I think you're absolutely right. You're spot on. That's exactly what's going to unfold. And if they want to know how to talk about it, they need to tune into Washington Watch and just listen, because we talk about it frequently. Rana, I want to thank you for joining us. Always great to see you.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Pray, vote, stand. We need to pray, we need to vote, we need to stand. All right, we're going to give you an overview of what happened in Congress this week when we return, so don't go away. We're back.
All of us are born with the desire to find truth and meaning. Where did I come from? What happens when I die? While our answers to these questions may divide us, we are united in our need for the freedom to answer life's biggest questions and make life's biggest decisions for ourselves. That's why religious freedom matters for everyone. Religious freedom matters because the powerful have long wanted to control those who are less powerful. Religious freedom matters because the freedom of those who are different is often threatened by those who believe different is dangerous. Leah Sheribu, a Christian teenager in Nigeria, remains a captive of Boko Haram for her refusal to renounce her Christian faith. Chinese pastor Wang Yi is serving a 9-year sentence for speaking publicly against the Chinese government. In Pakistan, Asif Pervez is on death row for allegedly sending a blasphemous text message. All of this because people in power decided different is dangerous. At the Center for Religious Liberty at Family Research Council, we promote religious freedom for everyone because the only alternative is religious freedom for no one. We encourage Americans and the American government to engage and advocate for the persecuted, and they do. We work every day to bring good news to the afflicted, to proclaim liberty to captives and freedom to prisoners. We do it because that's what Jesus does. We work to give freedom to others because we ourselves have been set free.
Yesterday, the House passed a continuing resolution to avoid a potential government shutdown and extend government funding into 2024. Now, it's what we've called a laddered approach. You've got part of it being funded into January, another part into February, and there's going to be a battle when we start moving these appropriations bills through and we come to the end of this funding period in January and February. But despite that, yesterday, a group of conservatives in the House stymied a procedural vote to advance an appropriations bill today, killing a rule that would have allowed the bill to go forward, to send a message that they weren't happy about yesterday's continuing resolution. Well, as a result, the leadership announced there were no additional votes and are expected to send everybody home. Everybody's going home until after Thanksgiving. And so the whole idea is to allow them to cool off. We actually had a couple of physical or near physical altercations this week on Capitol Hill. I mean, the tensions have been building. So joining me now to discuss this and more, I guess give us a blow-by-blow, is Kana Gonzalez, Senior Director of Government Affairs here at the Family Research Council. Kana, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Tony.
So give us an overview of what happened in the House in the last 24 hours. You can skip you can actually skip the kidney punches and just go to the CR. So what actually passed yesterday in terms of this government funding bill?
Yeah, so Speaker Johnson has been on the job for about 3 weeks. You recall that prior to that, the House was without a speaker and paralyzed for about 3 weeks. So he's on the job, and he is doing a balancing act. He's trying to bring together various wings of his party to agree on the last 5 bills. Something that spending bills for the year, which did not get passed before September 1st, which was the original funding deadline. And so there had been a funding extension that runs out on Friday at midnight this week. And there was the need to either pass the remaining 5 bills, which was not happening quickly enough, or to pass another continuing resolution. And Mike Johnson, I think wisely, saw that the Senate was preparing to jam the House by continuing government funding until just before Christmas, when everybody's really exhausted and needs to go home, and to have a big fight at Christmas time. This has happened every year since 2012. This is a well-worn playbook, and Mike Johnson disrupted that playbook by convincing enough Republicans to pass a continuing resolution that, as you said, carries this fight into mid-January and early February.
Okay, so let's talk about now, and they had this, as I mentioned at the top of this segment, there was another appropriations bill. The rule that would set up the vote was struck down, and so the leadership just sent everybody home for Thanksgiving to cool off. So when we come back, how many appropriations bills, or 12 altogether, how many have actually passed the House and how many are still pending?
Well, there are different ways to look at it. You could think of it as a 12-round boxing match, and we've passed 7. And so maybe it is time for everybody to go back to their corner and take a cool down and think for the next week and a half. They'll be back in almost a little less than 2 weeks. So there are 5 bills that remain to be passed. But another way to look at this, Tony, is in terms of the overall budget. About 80% of the annual budget has been passed in dollar figures. And so they're looking at the last 20%. And in that are some of the hardest fights, frankly, on our issues and other issues that are being debated on the Hill right now.
In my conversations with leadership, even as late as this morning, the idea here is to get the bulk of the dollar amount, as you just pointed out, of government funding through and approved, so that when we get to those tough issues, if the backdrop is a quote-unquote government shutdown, it's not that big of a deal from a standpoint of its impact upon government. And so that can't be the threat that makes people accept status quo.
That's right. In addition to pushing to get this through Christmas so that we're not jammed up against the wall right at Christmas trying to pass an omnibus, a massive spending bill that really no one has had time to go through, except for the special interests that love to jam last-minute Christmas items in there for themselves. We've pushed this off until mid-January and early February. He's also staged this. Speaker Johnson has also staged this so that we can have these funding fights a few at a time, not all at once.
But given the fact that there's not a lot of legislative days once they return from Thanksgiving until the first of the year. Sounds like a lot of time, but you've got basically 2 weeks there for for Christmas that they're out. Don't come back in until usually the first full week in January. So they'll still have a lot of work to do. Very quickly, we're almost out of time, but the real battle is probably going to take place over the Ukraine funding bill with attached border security issues.
That's right. The Senate really wants to send billions of dollars in additional funds to Ukraine. And conservatives in the House in particular, and some in the Senate, are pushing for reinforcing our own border in the South. And that is a fight that is playing out amidst all of this.
All right, Kana Gonzalez, thanks so much for the update. Always great to see you. Thanks for stopping by on Washington Watch.
Thanks, Tony.
All right, folks, there's still a lot of work to be done, but in my view, progress is being made because, as Kana just talked about, we've kind of, the new speakers disrupted the historic play of the Democrats and of the establishment of just pushing, and it's not just Democrats, it's the establishment, it's Republicans too, pushing members up to the point of Christmas and just forcing them to accept whatever's put before them. That's not going to happen this year. All right, stick around. Ted Cruz joins us next here on Washington Watch.
The world is hurting, streets are filled with crime, families are broken, sin is celebrated, and God is mocked. Everywhere we look, the wages of our sin are on full display. As Christians, we know that surrender to God's will is the solution to our biggest problems, but not everyone agrees. Even in church, we hear people say the most important thing is to be tolerant, that we shouldn't impose our morality on other people, and that loving our neighbor means celebrating what they do. But you can't do that. It's not that you don't love your neighbor, you do, but you care about God's opinion more than your neighbor's opinion, and this makes you different. In fact, sometimes it makes you feel alone, like you are the only one. But there is good news. You are not alone, not even close. Research has found that there are 59 million American adults who are a lot like you. There are millions of people around the country who are born again, deeply committed to practicing their faith, and believe the Bible is the reliable Word of God. But that's not all. They're also engaged in our government. They're voters. They're more likely to be involved in their community, and they're making a difference in elections. The problem is that a lot of them feel alone too. We want to change that. FRC wants to connect these 59 million Americans to speak the truth together, no matter the cost. If you want to learn more about this group and what it means to be a spiritually active, governance-engaged conservative, or if you want to find out if you are one of these SageCons yourself, go to frc.org/SageCon and take the quiz to find out. The world is hurting, and we have the solution. We can't do it alone, but we can do it if we work together. That's what we're working toward every day. Join us. Go to frc.org/SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more. That's SAGECON, SageCon, to learn more.
I'm often asked by people, Tony, how do you stay encouraged? How do you deal with all of the stuff in Washington, D.C., the negative policies that are attacking our faith, our family, and our freedoms? Well, you want me to let you in on the secret? It's called the Word of God. And that is why the Family Research Council embarked on Stand on the Word, a 2-year journey through the Bible. It's a chronological Bible reading plan with just 10 to 15 minutes a day. In 2 years, you will have covered the entire Bible. And to go along with this, Monday through Friday, I do a morning devotional that goes along with the reading of the day. It's all designed to encourage you on this journey because the Word of God, as the psalmist said, in my affliction, here's my comfort. Your Word gives me life. That is our source of strength. To find out more, go to tonyperkins.com or frc.org/Bible. And I invite you to join me every morning for our Stand on the Word Bible devotion. Welcome back to Washington Watch. I'm your host, Tony Perkins. Good to have you with us. The website is tonyperkins.com. And again, let me remind you, based on our last conversation, the last segment about what's been happening in Congress and the House in particular, it underscores why we need to be praying. And so, again, I invite you to join in the effort to pray for the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson. If you'd like to be a part of that effort, text the word speaker to 67742. That's the word speaker to 67742. Yesterday, after the rally for Israel on the National Mall, which united hundreds of thousands of Americans standing with Israel, Senate Democrats voted to block military aid to Israel, siding with their base on the left instead of the people of Israel. This was the bill that was sent over from the House that was a reduction in money going to the IRS, instead giving it to Israel. And they used that as an excuse in the Senate to not support the bill. Now, you know, in response to the rise in anti-Semitism from the left, earlier today, the House Ways and Means Committee held a hearing, in fact, it's still going on, to examine anti-Semitism on college campuses following the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel. Now, we've seen colleges and universities really as breeding grounds for any number of destructive ideologies, from CRT to Marxism to in all of its forms. But anti-Semitism was lurking under the surface throughout all of this. Joining me now to discuss this is Senator Ted Cruz from Texas. He serves on 4 Senate committees, including the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the Senate Judiciary Committee. He is also the author of a recently released book, Unwoke: How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America. Senator Cruz, welcome back to Washington Watch. Good to see you.
Tony, great to be with you. Thanks for having me back.
We'll get to your book, which discusses our universities as a laboratory for the left, but give us your thoughts on the anti-Semitism at our colleges and universities, which was highlighted by the House Ways and Means Committee today.
Well, it's an enormous problem. We're seeing it all across the country, and we're seeing it at Harvard University. We're seeing it at MIT. We're seeing it at universities throughout the country, and it's actually integrally related to the new book you just mentioned, which the focus of the book is how the radical left has seized the institutions of our nation, and it starts with universities. Each chapter of the book is a different institution that has been seized by the cultural Marxist. And chapter 1 is universities. And you look at, and it goes from universities to K through 12 education, to journalism, to government, to big business, to big tech, to entertainment, to science. And the last chapter is on China as a central nexus that is intertwining it all. And if you look at what's happening with this anti-Semitism, you know, I was recently talking with a tech entrepreneur from Silicon Valley who's a man of the left. He's a Democrat. And he was expressing enormous bewilderment at where this anti-Semitism on the left was coming from, and whether it's the squad in the House of Representatives or whether it is these viciously anti-Israel protesters on campus. And I explained that the answer is cultural Marxism, that if you look at cultural Marxism, the Marxist frame divides the world into oppressors and victims. And when it comes to the war in Gaza, to the extreme left, they have defined Jews as the oppressors, and they have defined Palestinians as the victims. And accordingly, the cultural Marxist supports the violent revolution of the so-called victims to overthrow the so-called oppressors. And that's why, for example, at Harvard, my alma mater, 35 student groups signed a ridiculous, ignorant, naive, and anti-Semitic statement that said every bit of the violence carried out by Hamas terrorists, every civilian murdered, every woman and little girl raped, every infant slaughtered, they said all of that is 100% the fault of Israel. Why? Because to the cultural Marxist, everything is justified in the so-called victim overthrowing the so-called oppressor, and we're seeing it literally every day across the world.
So Senator, that is a worldview that is, quite frankly, totally incompatible with what has built America and what sustains this republic. Yes. I mean, the two just don't work.
No, that is exactly right. And this is an assault that is deliberately aimed at taking down America. What this book does is that I try to combine, number one, to explain how and why they seized control of the institutions, and then number two, to give a clear, practical battle plan for taking the institutions back. But I give the history where in the 1960s, Marxists began infiltrating our universities. And first of all, they were plain vanilla Marxists. The oppressors and victims they were looking at were socioeconomic. It was the owners of capital and the proletariat. And their solution was a violent revolution and government forcibly redistributing the wealth. Once in the university, Marxism began to mutate, and it became a number of different variants. One of the first was critical race theory. That same Marxist prism of oppressor and victim, but instead of socioeconomic, they look at race, and they view America as irredeemably racist. And their solution, again, is the so-called victim races violently overthrowing and using government power to redistribute from the so-called oppressor races. It then transmogrified along the lines of gender and sexual orientation and gender identity. And each of these it is designed. Look, Marxism, the ideas of the radical left are wildly unpopular, which means they thrive on, number one, power and coercion, and number two, indoctrination. It's why the Marxists focus on schools, on universities and K through 12, and journalism and entertainment, because it takes indoctrination to push this assault. And Tony, you're exactly right. It is an assault on America's free enterprise system. It is an assault on our Constitution. It is an assault on our Bill of Rights. It is an assault right at the heart of the cultural Marxist view, is that the founding of America was a moment of evil, that the people who founded America were oppressors that were oppressing the Native Americans, and everything that has flowed since has been evil. And so this is unequivocally an assault on our nation that takes patriots, it takes Christians, it takes people who are not insane to rise up and stand against it, because the objective is to tear down our entire nation.
Historically, when we look at what Marxism has done as it has evolved, as you have just described there, it has led to anarchy, because it has torn down the very institutions that uphold civilized society, which leads then to more power in the hands of a few, which ultimately leads to tyranny. That's the path that we're on if we allow them to go unchecked.
Inevitably, that's what it does. And Marxism, I think, is the most evil ideology that has ever been invented by man. It has resulted in more murder, more torture, more oppression, more suffering, more poverty than any other ideology in human history. And it is, look, the book starts actually with telling my family story. Tony, you know my father very well. My dad, as you know, was born and grew up in Cuba. And my father, as a teenager, when he was 14, he began fighting alongside Fidel Castro. And my dad was imprisoned in Cuba. He was tortured in Cuba. And he fled Cuba and came to America seeking freedom. And I tell that story in the beginning of the book. And I tell the story of my tia Sonia, who fought in the counter-revolution against Castro. She was imprisoned and tortured by Castro's goons. And then there's another story I tell at the beginning of the book, which is a story that my grandmother, my abuela, told me. She was a sixth grade teacher in Cuba. And when I was a little boy, she told me that when Castro and the communists seized power, one of the first things he did is he sent the military into the elementary schools. And the soldiers would go into kindergartens and first grades. And they would tell the students, they'd tell the little kids, they'd say, close your eyes and pray to Jesus and ask for candy. And the kids would do so, and they'd open their eyes and there'd be no candy. And then they would tell the children, close your eyes and pray to Fidel Castro and ask for candy. And the kids would do so, and the soldiers would quietly put a piece of candy on each of their desks. That's Marxism. It is built on lies. It's built on indoctrination. It's designed to tear down allegiances to anything, to God, to family, to anything except the all-powerful state. And that is the ideology that we are seeing that has infested the major institutions of our nation.
Yeah, I think that's beyond challenge at this point. It's here. It's evident. We're seeing it play out. So I want to get to what do we do, but before we do that, how can people get a copy of your book? Where can they find it?
Well, the book is available in any bookstore. It's also available on Amazon.com. It's available Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. It has rocketed up the bestseller lists, and so you can get it right now today. It just came out. And so I would encourage you to buy the book. It's readable, it's interesting, it's fun. It's not an abstract academic treatise. It's real world. And I encourage you not only buy one for yourself, but Christmas is right around the corner. It makes a great Christmas gift. You know, buy a copy for your mom, buy a copy for your best friend, buy a copy for your crazy liberal friend who believes this nonsense, or even better, buy a copy for your kids or your grandkids so they can understand the poison that people are trying to indoctrinate them with. I wrote this book to be a battle plan, to be a useful tool for how we can fight back, how we can save our country.
And college students, buy a copy for your professor, and you know, wrap it up.
Excellent idea.
And put it on their desk. All right, so Ted, what do we do? What is the path forward? Because I think that the hour is late. As you said, that long march through the institutions that began 6 decades ago is almost complete.
It is, and I lay out basically 3 sets of tools to fight cultural Marxism. Set number 1 is sunlight and transparency. The ideas of the radical left are wildly unpopular. Normal, rational people don't support abolishing the police. They don't support open borders. They don't support surgically mutilating and castrating little children. They don't celebrate the atrocities carried out by Hamas terrorists. The only way the left stays in power is by hiding them, by using force and power, and by indoctrination. So shining sunlight is powerful. And for example, taking back K through 12 institutions, I talk about what happened in Loudoun County, where a teenage girl was sexually assaulted by a boy wearing a skirt in the girls' bathroom. The school board suppressed it, denied it, put their ideology above the children's safety, and that resulted in it woke people up across Virginia. Moms got ticked off, and Virginia went from, in 2020, voting for Biden by 10 points, being bright blue, to flipping the year later and electing Glenn Youngkin, a Republican, in 2021 because moms were furious and wanted to take their school boards back. And by the way, I'm getting involved in school board races all over Texas, and we're winning victory after victory because sunlight is powerful. That's
Right.
tool number one. Tool number two is changing the cost-benefit analysis for the players here to increase the costs of going woke. So, for example, with big business, I talk about what happened with Bud Light and what happened with Target, where those woke executives put their political agenda over the customer's interest, tried to jam it down their throats, and the result was staggering. Both companies lost tens of billions of dollars in market cap. We need to increase the cost, the negative side of going woke. And then the third thing that I suggest is conservatives and libertarians with resources who've been successful in business need to invest in the organs of transmission of ideas. For too long, we've ceded ideas to the left. Go buy a TV station, buy a radio station, buy a movie studio, buy a book publishing house, buy a record label, engage in the battle of ideas. And the model I point to for this is Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter, which I think is the most consequential step for free speech in decades.
We cannot stand on the sidelines or be spectators in the stands and say, well, man, this is bad. This is bad. We've got to get on the field. And I think you're absolutely right. The example you used of what's happening in education, where parents have gotten involved, part of that silver lining being the COVID, where parents were for the first time exposed to what their kids were being exposed to. And you're absolutely right. What happened in Loudoun County was a catalyst for changing that entire state of Virginia. So it's right where you are. What is before you, the opportunity that you have to make a difference right where you are?
That is exactly right. The power of sunshine and engagement is really significant. And we can't leave fighting to take these institutions back to someone else. It is our responsibility. You know, you made reference to the long, slow march of institutions through institutions. I lay out in the book on woke the history of that. In the 1960s, Marxists in America were using violent revolution. So, for example, you had the Weather Underground trying to blow up the Pentagon. You had the 1968 Democrat National Convention, violent riots, and they saw the American people recoil from that. And Marxist thinkers very deliberately said, all right, for America, we need a different strategy. And they called it, the phrase you just used, the long, slow march through institutions. They said, we're going to infiltrate them from the inside and we're going to flip them. But their continued power is dependent on keeping it secret. What you're doing, right, what Family Research Council does, of letting people know is the first step to turning it around.
That's right. Senator Ted Cruz, always great to see you. Unwoke, How to Defeat Cultural Marxism in America. Folks, go out and get a couple of copies and share the good news. Ted, good to see you.
Great to see you, Tony. God bless.
All right. Senator Ted Cruz of Texas, and that means we're out of time. But thanks for joining us today. And until next time, I leave you once again with the encouraging words of the Apostle Paul found in Ephesians 6, where he says, when you've done everything you can do, when you've prayed, when you've prepared, and when you have taken your stand, just keep standing.
Washington Watch with Tony Perkins is brought to you by Family Research Council and is entirely listener-supported. Portions of the show discussing candidates are brought to you by Family Research Council Action. For more information on anything you've heard today, or to find out how you can partner with us in our ongoing efforts to promote faith, family, and freedom, visit TonyPerkins.com. Also, to leave a comment about Washington Watch, call our watch line at 1-866-372-7234. That's 1-866-372-7234.